Okay, so thank you so much, Janine. It's very interesting. And now we will have a discussion. And before going into it, I know that Janine, it's your second time in
It
Japan.
is.
And you have already been here for a week.
Yes.
So you got to explore our transportation system, the train, the buses. Also, you got to go to the amusement parks and
Yes.
museums. So we will discuss about that.
Absolutely.
And another thing I wanted to point out is you also got to experience these public transportation and also music parks with individuals with visual impairment and blindness. So I think that's also a very interesting part. So we both are sighted individuals,
Yes.
but I think you and I, we always value the friendship with the individual with visual impairment and blindness. And so then you got to experience this not just by yourself, but also with the colleagues and the friends with visual impairment. So
I did.
I think that piece also kind of fits in. So I would like to ask you. So let's talk about how accessible is Japan.
Let's start with that.
So my
So,
question, how
yes,
accessible
We
was
and
it?
I put this together so
Yeah.
that we can talk in specifics about accessibility in Japan. And the very first thing that kind of stood out to me as a professor or as a professional who works in the area of what's called orientation and mobility, and I didn't specify orientation and mobility, but if you think about people who are blind and visually impaired, how they use a cane, my profession is called an orientation and mobility specialist, and I actually train people how to use that cane in the United States. And that's one of our programs that we have at Ohio State at a master's level degree. And within that degree program and within that profession, it teaches you as a professional to look at different environments so that you can analyze and determine best crossings and best accessibility areas for students who are blind and visually impaired. So in looking at street design here in Japan,
This is a very typical street in Tsukuba area.
this is a very typical street in Tsukuba.
Yeah.
You can see it's very similar to the United States in that there is the white crosswalk, there is the pedestrian head that actually changes from red to green when it changes. It also has an audible pedestrian signal or an audible sound to alert individuals who are blind and visually impaired when it is safe to cross. So it was very interesting to see that in some areas of Japan, Tsukuba specifically, this was a very typical crossing and very similar to that in the United States. What was also exciting is that not only did I go to Tokyo and the town of Tsukuba, or the city of Tsukuba, I got to go to a more rural area.
Yeah.
You can just explain where this
This
is.
is Mount Tsukuba-san, right? Okay.
And this is a smaller, more of a rural area, I would
very
say.
traditional, yeah.
Yes. And even in the rural, traditional areas of Tsukuba, I found it interesting because even though we don't necessarily see the crosswalk signs or the street crossing signs or the audible pedestrian signals, there are design areas here that are conducive to people who are traveling with a cane. For instance, in this alleyway, if someone was traveling from this area of town to this store, this cut, or this is probably a drainage system, I would assume, coming from the mountain, but this cut across the street right here is actually a very good use of environmental design for people who are blind and visually impaired walking in a more rural area. As if they're searching for this market in particular, if they hit this with their cane, they realize, oh, I already passed the market. So it would give them a tactile cue using their cane that they would need to turn around and go back to find the door. Also, I liked, even on the sidewalks here, you see this is a very traditional, it's dirt, like grass or dirt over here. It's probably more grass in the spring because this was more winter to spring area. But if you look at the definition here, it's very similar to an American sidewalk where people who are blind and visually impaired can actually use their cane to trail and find different turns in the crosswalk. So accessibility features are everywhere, and if you know what to look for, you can find those.
And actually, it doesn't have to be caustic.
No, it does not.
Yeah, it's not something that's made especially for visual impairment, but it's actually how you use it. It can be accessible and it could be to help navigate, right?
Absolutely.
Like,
And
yeah.
this is a great example of like that universal design.
Right.
So sidewalks and curb cuts,
Mhm.
and in this instance, just the cut across the alleyway.
Mm-hmm.
A very simple, cost-effective way
Right.
to make sure that travel is accessible for people of different abilities. Transitioning to a traditional smart city. I spent a lot of time in Tokyo over the last week, and moving from the rural areas of Tsukuba to the metropolitan area of Tokyo, it was so refreshing to see the amount of accessibility features that are built into the city. These here, these yellow lines, and for those of you who are sighted or visiting the city the first time, you might not think much about the fact that there are these lines or these, often we call them truncated domes or braille bumps.
Mhm.
I don't know if there's a,
We call it yellow line or braille blocks.
Okay.
Braille blocks.
and what they are, they're tactile markings in the street. So what people who are blind and visually impaired are able to do is, and you'll see here demonstrated in this picture with a colleague of mine, she was actually leading the way for me, who was unfamiliar to Tokyo, from the Japan Braille Library to a place where we were able to have dinner that night. And the accessibility and the fact that these braille blocks or braille lines were everywhere on every street, it was so easy to navigate from point A to point B. And when we talk about voice of the consumer, I asked my colleagues, is this helpful? And both of them said, yes, these are very helpful. It's something that they use every day when they travel. One of the interesting things I think in Japan too, the School for the Blind that's associated with Tsukuba is located in Tokyo.
Yeah.
If you'd like to talk about that a little bit.
So University of Tsukuba, we have 6 special schools, special schools which is attached to this university, and one is School for the Blind. It's the National School for the Blind in Tokyo, and it's not stationed in Tsukuba. It's stationed in very central Tokyo.
Yes.
And if you go there, you will see a lot of the braille blocks. And also we have a lot of graduates who has a lot of voices, and they work together with the JR or the metro, the metros. And so when the city wants to install a bathroom, or if the metro wants to design their station more inclusive, they would call on one of the graduates. And so we have, I think there's a good connection with the public and the School for the Blind. Yeah. And I'm very lucky that we have that as a resource.
And the 2 colleagues that I was working with as part of this exploration, both of them went to the School for the Blind in Tsukuba, and both of them were originally from prefectures outside of Tokyo, and both relocated to Tokyo, in part because of the accessibility of the city. They said it was very difficult to even transition back to their home areas. So the accessibility of the city is just a beautiful example of how people who are blind and visually impaired can live and be independent in an area that seems that it might not be accessible for everyone. The braille blocks also go across crosswalks in Tokyo, which is so nice. We do not have this in America. So one of the things that happens when I teach street crossing skills in America often is that students will veer. So sometimes they'll veer out of the crosswalk or into a line of traffic, so they have to listen a lot for traffic. But this accessible design makes it so that everyone is able to cross and remain in that crosswalk in a safe way. So I thought that was very interesting to see as well. The last piece I have to tell you about streets and accessibilities in Tsukuba. This is incredibly interesting. if you think about America when construction happens, and it happens quite often, I know across countries, oftentimes in America, one of the challenges that my students face when construction happens is that construction workers will put up a barricade that just basically says sidewalk closed. And travelers who are blind and visually impaired will encounter that, but there's no braille. And oftentimes it's set in a way that their cane will go under the barrier and it will hit them at waist height. So not only do they not understand that the sidewalk is closed, but there's no tactile markings to show them that the construction is happening. This was a beautiful example of construction in Japan, and from this, basically what happened is when the construction began, the engineers in charge of this construction area moved the braille dots so that people who are blind and visually impaired entering into this construction zone were able to still navigate a path that was somewhat altered and different to them, but still get them safely from point A to point B because of the universal design that was used here. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah. And another thing to add is we also have a lot of construction on campus. And we also have the yellow blocks, the braille blocks on campus as well. When we have construction, we do that as well. So we have to inform the users and also put the braille blocks the other way so they could still travel independently. So.
And this really goes back to what we were just saying. Sometimes it's just the simplest things
Yeah.
that make universal design accessible and
Mhm.
easy,
Mhm.
but it's things that we don't always think about.
Yeah, I think it's also being mindful of others. I
Yes.
think that's very important.
Yes.
Sometimes, we just think about ourselves, but if you think about others, yeah, I think it's very important.
And that mindfulness is so important. And that really goes back to what we started with at the end of my presentation at the beginning, is that collaboration.
Yeah.
Not only do you want voices of the engineers
Mhm.
and the traffic planners, but you want the voices of the professionals who know visual impairments and the consumers themselves who are traveling in these areas.